Well, welcome and thank you for being here today. This is our first uh, program in our Distinguished Artist Series for the 2024-25 season. I'm Rebecca Ravenel. I am the board chair of JRACraft, but I am also the chair of the Distinguished Artist Series. So if this is your first JRACraft event, here's a little bit about us. Our organization is committed to advancing scholarship, education, and public appreciation of crafts, as well as promoting individual achievements of excellence and innovation in the craft field. And we do that through a robust program of trips, talks, and tours, all of which you can find posted on our website. This afternoon, we're very excited to welcome ceramic artist and ocean advocate Courtney Mattison. Courtney's grand scale installations seek to bring awareness to the beauty and fragility of aquatic life, highlighting the need for changes in our behavior and treatment of the ocean and its precious inhabitants. Today, her talk will focus mainly on her career, background, and motivation for the work she does. On Saturday, Courtney will be in Washington, D.C. to give an in-person program, which will focus a bit more on the processes she uses to create her impressive installations, followed by a walkthrough of an exhibit in which she's participating, and that will be at Hillwood Estate Museum and Gardens. And we'll give more information on that later in the program. As I mentioned, Courtney will be answering questions at the end, so please do put those into the Q&A box. I'm delighted to welcome Courtney Mattison to join us now.
Thank you so much, Rebecca and Perry, for all your help, and to everyone at JRACraft and Hillwood for inviting me to share my work. It's nice to see everyone tuning in. I'll share my screen and get my presentation up here. I'll talk for about 45 minutes, and then, as Rebecca said, we'll leave time for a few questions at the end. Life on Earth wouldn't be possible without water. Water is what we look for when searching for other planets that might be as hospitable to life as Earth is. As renowned oceanographer and National Geographic Society explorer at large, Dr. Sylvia Earle says, "No water, no life, no blue, no green." She's also fond of saying that without water, we'd have a planet a lot like Mars. The ocean, which covers over 70% of Earth's surface, connects all of us, from the deep mesophotic coral reefs of the Philippines to the icy peaks of the Rocky Mountains. And because we're all connected to the ocean, our actions, the carbon dioxide we emit, the materials we waste, the fish we eat, all have an impact on it, no matter where these actions occur. I deeply believe that art can shape our path towards more wholehearted actions and policies for marine conservation. So I combine my backgrounds in marine conservation biology and ceramic sculpture to inspire social change and policy change and translate concepts from environmental science into sculptural installations and objects in an attempt to bring the beauty and the fragility of marine life above the surface and into view. Coral reefs in particular have really captivated my imagination for as long as I can remember. And I'm really happiest when the exotic forms and vibrant colors and often venomous appendages of the animals that inhabit a tropical reef dance through the window of my scuba mask as I slowly hover above, or in some cases behind. This is a Napoleon wrasse I met in Australia named Wally. I got scuba certified right after high school in 2004, and I got to experience sinking down to colorful corals living on a reef for the first time in that opportunity. I remember hovering among them, and I felt like I was exploring an alien universe. There's just nothing like it. And by the time I had already taken my first marine biology class in high school in San Francisco, I had already begun sculpting corals and other marine invertebrates from clay, combining art and science in a way that felt completely natural to me, but that I only really realized later was pretty unusual and unique. And I'm really grateful for truly inspired art and science teachers in my high school for sparking that interest. When I started freshman year at Skidmore College, I knew I had to combine my interests in marine biology and sculpture. And so I immediately started working with my advisor to develop an interdisciplinary or self-determined major. So I just have this pulled up as a side note because the title of my senior project at Skidmore was Fragile Beauty, and that's the same as the title of the exhibition at Hillwood that I'm in, that I'll be speaking at on Saturday. I spent about 9 months during college studying abroad in Queensland, Australia, studying coral reef ecology and reef fish taxonomy at James Cook University. And I did field work on the Great Barrier Reef. So that was a chance for me to just fall completely head over heels in love with coral reefs. And I was enchanted by the mysteries they hold and the tiny plant-like animals, these faceless animals that are the architects of some of the world's largest living organisms. It's been my goal to visit as many healthy coral reefs as possible ever since. Since those early days, my interest in the world of marine science has led me to some exceptional places where I've been really fortunate to experience amazing, fragile beauty and the wildness beneath the surface. From 2014 until as recently as last year, I've worked with Dr. Sylvia Earle's nonprofit, Mission Blue, on marine science expeditions to some really amazing places, supporting research and conservation for everything from polar bears in the Norwegian Arctic to eelgrass meadows in the Balearic Islands and hammerhead shark species in Socorro, Mexico. And in 2022, I worked with Mission Blue to organize an expedition with a number of partners, including the Undersea Hunter Group and Oceanic Society, to support marine science and policy in the Galapagos with a submersible capable of diving down to 1,000 meters and teams of scientists collecting data on a huge variety of topics, including whale shark migration, deep sea kelp forests, and endemic seabird populations. I feel a deep connection to Indonesia's coral reefs in particular because I've spent a lot of time exploring them, diving in places like Raja Ampat, which is a archipelago in the far eastern western Papua, Indonesia, and other parts of Indonesia like Komodo, Alor, and Bali. I've made 8 trips there since 2016, so I really kind of fell in love with that region. And this photo is from 2019 when Oceanic Society invited me on an expedition to Raja Ampat for their Blue Habits project, where we created a short film about my work to raise awareness about coral reef conservation. I think the beauty of coral reefs really lies in the diversity of their species. Corals and anemones and other vertebrates compete with one another for light and other resources in this kind of beautiful dance. And the reefs of Indonesia and the surrounding region, called the Coral Triangle, are more diverse and healthy than almost anywhere else on the planet. The reefs there are often referred to as the Amazon rainforest of the sea for that reason. Coral reefs are crucial to the health of the ocean as a whole because although they only exist in equatorial regions and cover just less than 0.2% of the seafloor, they support 1/4 of all life in the ocean. They also provide food, coastal protection, tourism dollars, and other value to people who directly rely on them. According to the Global Coral Reef Monitoring Network, the value of goods and services provided by coral reefs is estimated at $2.7 trillion per year, and that includes 36 billion in coral reef tourism alone. Through all my experiences in the field, I've seen a lot of beauty, and that has served as a really endless muse for my art practice. But I've also experienced severe human-caused threats that have also served as a huge source of motivation for my work. It's no secret that climate change is ravaging coral reefs, and scientists have been expecting coral bleaching to get worse for many decades. So while I was falling in love studying coral reefs back in college in 2007, I was simultaneously heartbroken to learn about their impending demise. Corals are so sensitive that the slightest change to the temperature or the chemistry of the seawater that surrounds them can cause widespread devastation through a phenomenon called coral bleaching. which occurs when corals become stressed by rising sea temperatures, often caused by warming events like El Nino and more recently climate change. And of course, climate change is resulting from our fossil fuel use and greenhouse gas emissions that trap the sun's heat within our atmosphere. Corals stressed by warming sea temperatures lose their symbiotic algae called zooxanthellae that live inside their tissues and normally photosynthesize to provide an important food source for the coral host. So it causes the coral itself to sicken and starve, basically. Corals can recover from bleaching, which is one thing people don't realize. So they can actually reverse this process by being recolonized by those tiny algae, the zooxanthellae. But bleaching most often is severe and leads to coral death, algal domination, and reef erosion, not to mention the gradual destruction of a complex hideout for countless fish and invertebrate species that live among the reef. So it's sort of like a city going bankrupt and letting its buildings fall apart. Another major issue for ocean health is the acidification of seawater, which occurs when carbon dioxide dissolves into the ocean, forms carbonic acid, and releases hydrogen ions that keep corals and other shell-building organisms from precipitating the calcium carbonate, basically limestone, that they need to construct or sculpt their stony structures and create coral reefs. Overfishing is also a huge issue, and 90% of big predatory fish like tuna, cod, swordfish, and sharks have already been removed from the ocean by commercial fisheries. I didn't take this photo, but I was actually in Tokyo and saw this tuna market in Tokyo a couple weeks ago. It was really kind of stunning. Land-based sources of pollution full of chemicals, sewage, fertilizer, and pesticides pose another major threat to marine life, causing dead zones like in the Gulf of Mexico, where excess nutrients cause plankton to grow out of control, die, and kind of suck the oxygen out of the water that cause larger critters like fish to kind of suffocate and die. And of course, plastic pollution is another hot topic, sort of a major issue that you've probably heard of, forming giant garbage patches and oceanic gyres. And the plastics break down into their chemical components and can be very harmful as well. Without our help to eliminate the pressures we put on reefs, leading researchers predict that nearly 100% of reefs will be in a rapid and terminal decline by 2050 and may lose their ecological functionality by the end of this century or sooner. We've lost half of the world's coral reefs since I was born, and I'm 39. So they may cease to function ecologically within my lifetime, and that feels very personal for me. And I know this all sounds very doom and gloom, but there is some hope. So in 2018, there was a report published in the journal Nature Climate Change that suggested that climate change selects for more robust, heat-tolerant coral species that might be able to survive as the ocean warms. So some kind of weedy species may be able to survive. There's also more recent evidence that some reefs around the world appear to be less exposed to global heating than others, thanks to quirks of ocean currents. If we slow down climate change and protect reefs in the meantime, we may be able to save some reefs by reducing stressors that impact them, namely by switching from fossil fuels to renewable energy, limiting coastal pollution and development, and regulating marine wildlife consumption to stop overfishing. Through my art practice, my goal is to highlight these facts as a witness to change. I do hope viewers feel empowered to act while we still can, and we can. There are some really vital marine ecosystems out there that are alive and so worth saving. But I also know that the future of coral reefs is grim, so I'm not naive about it, and the story must be told no matter what. So that's what I'm here to do. Art can be a really powerful tool to communicate these ideas. And it can go beyond showing us scientific evidence or revealing an environmental problem. It can make us care personally and act to protect. The first time we saw a photograph of Earth from space sparked this kind of feeling. an understanding of our home, our connectedness, and how tiny, fragile, and special life is. We protect what we care about, and we care about what we know and understand. Art and science are really two ways in which humanity explores and explains the world. Artists and scientists actually have a lot in common, I think. They thrive on a shared sense of curiosity about the world and work to form a better understanding of it. Both artists and scientists use creativity to come up with solutions to questions about the world, often developing meticulous techniques to achieve answers to those questions. There are so many examples of how art and science have been combined successfully over time that have served as inspiration for my work. And I think Da Vinci is a great example from the Renaissance. But one of my favorite and most relevant examples of art exploring marine science is the work of Leopold and Rudolf Blaschka, pictured here. They're a father and son duo who collected marine invertebrates and reproduced them in glass in exquisite and artistic detail in the mid 1800s. A more contemporary example is Maya Lin, who's really one of the most renowned visual artists of our time and one of my favorites. For her 2022 solo show at Virginia MoCA, she created the site-responsive sculptural work called Marble Chesapeake and Delaware Bay, with glass marbles that map these waterways onto the walls and floor of the gallery. Art can be a powerful conservation tool to inspire social change and shape how we understand environmental issues. This photo is from the poppies at the Tower of London in 2014. They're all ceramic poppies, and I just thought this work was so amazing to commemorate World War I. Art can impact our emotions and form personal connections and build community. So with that belief, today I work full-time as an artist to bring attention to threats to ocean health. This is a photo of my very first large-scale ceramic sculptural coral reef wall installation called Our Changing Seas, A Coral Reef Story. And this work was the culmination of my master's thesis in environmental studies at Brown University, where I combined coursework in marine conservation science and policy with thesis credits and a co-advisor in the ceramic studio at the Rhode Island School of Design, or RISD, in Providence. So it debuted in 2011 in the lobby of the Herbert C. Hoover Building in DC, which is the headquarters of the US Department of Commerce and NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. As a master's candidate in environmental studies at Brown from 2009 to 2011, I interviewed marine researchers and artists inspired by marine life and the environment about the potential for art to inspire coral reef conservation. At the same time, I was taking ceramics courses at RISD, and I developed a method of constructing enormous and complex sculptural installations in a studio I rented in downtown Providence, Rhode Island. And I knew going into this project that I really wanted to create a masterpiece, something that would be visually stunning and transform a human-made environment. But I didn't know if I could actually achieve that or even what that meant, really. So I used my interview results to inform my design, and I just basically started building as many corals as I could possibly make, and I figured out how to install them together afterwards, which I do not recommend. But this time it worked out, luckily, after lots of work. The resulting work is about 15 feet tall and 11 feet wide, and nearly 1,500 pounds of ceramic installed on plywood panels hung on a steel grid wall structure. And it depicts, in my imagination, sort of a healthy, vibrant Indo-Pacific coral reef with an upward transition into coral bleaching, erosion, and eventually being smothered by kind of slimy seaweed in the upper right-hand corner. And as I mentioned, the Department of Commerce doubles as headquarters for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And the administrator of NOAA at the time was Dr. Jane Lubchenco, who today serves as Deputy Director for Climate and Environment in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. So I was thrilled to have her speak at the opening reception for Our Changing Seas at the Commerce Building in 2011 when the work debuted. And then later that summer, she connected me with the American Association for the Advancement of Science, AAAS, which publishes Science Magazine and has their headquarters in downtown DC. So our Changing Seas 1 has been on extended loan in the atrium of the AAAS building ever since. And my Our Changing Seas series has really evolved and snowballed a lot in the last 13 or so years since that first work. And this year I completed my eighth and ninth works for it. Our Changing Seas 8 is my largest work to date. It's absolutely enormous. And we installed it in a confidential location at a workplace in California. So I'm not allowed to share all the details, and I don't even have photos of it completed yet. But here's a video of me creating pieces for it in my studio in San Francisco earlier this year. You can see I build hollow forms using coils of clay, and I texture each piece by hand using simple tools like chopsticks and paintbrushes. And I build my large wall works on the floor of my studio using a gigantic template that I have printed from my digital designs. So I incorporate pre-fired porcelain tentacles sometimes and other delicate components that I have stored in kombucha jars in my studio, and I sort of stick them into the clay while I'm building. And that gives some of the glazes an extra pop of color, or like a bright white color. Calcium carbonate happens to be both the compound that corals precipitate to form their stony skeletons, and it's also a common glaze ingredient. So I find that chemical parallel interesting in my work. Our Changing Seas 8 was commissioned by a design studio called SPM Design, and it actually wraps around the corner, joining two walls, and it stretches over 30 feet high and 18 feet wide. So that video is really just a taste of what we did with that one. It's really enormous. Our Changing Seas 9 is my most recent work in the series and was a special project for the new Christian Dior Couture boutique in Capri, Italy, which opened on Via Camarelle in April this year. And it was commissioned for the Christian Dior Couture collection, along with another wall work in the adjoining room called Capri Gyre, which in this photo stretches across two doors, including the changing room door of the boutique. So that was a fun challenge to think about incorporating doors into the design. My goal with my Our Changing Seas series is really to inspire awareness and policy change for coral reef conservation in surprising environments. It celebrates the exotic beauty of coral reefs and highlights the human-caused threats that they face. So climate change, ocean acidification, overfishing, and land-based pollution, like I mentioned. The themes that I explore in my work are really informed by my understanding of reefs and how they function. So I often say that I feel like a coral when I'm creating my work, kind of quietly and methodically constructing these large, delicate, stony structures that can change an ecosystem. Tactility is a major theme in my work. It's one of the first things I realized creating coral reef invertebrates and ceramic is that everyone wants to touch them. And it's just like the real thing. Everyone wants to touch corals in the water, but if you do so in a destructive way, it can be really damaging. So fragility is another related theme that I explore in a lot of my work. And it almost goes without saying that brittle porcelain, anemone tentacles, and coral branches break easily if they're improperly handled. So because that's similar to the delicate bodies of living reef organisms, that shared fragility is really fundamental to the message of my work. Rather than being too fragile, it feels essential, really, that the medium of my work be ceramic for that reason. Some of the best advice, or maybe worst advice, I ever got was from a ceramics teacher that said that my work was too fragile to be practical. And that made a big impression on me. I felt like at first I was offended because I felt like he missed the point of my work as fine art and it was too bogged down in practical concerns. But it motivated me to not only ignore the feedback, or instead of ignoring it, I kind of rebelled from it. So this is a good example. This is a work called Catch of the Day that is currently installed in the Fragile Beauty exhibition at Hillwood in DC. So I'm rebellious with my work, but I'm also a perfectionist. So that rebellion against practical concerns of making my work less fragile really drove me to fine tune my craftsmanship in a way that retains its fragility, but avoids flaws and makes it so that handling my work requires respect and care, but not magic. Like I can still ship my work around the world, but retain that sense of fragility. Ceramics as an art medium is full of troubleshooting and eyeballing just inherently. And that must be partly why it's so often put in the category of craft instead of fine art. So the troubleshooting never goes away, but over time, I've worked really hard to move beyond, exceptional craftsmanship to a world where I can really push boundaries in the medium, both conceptually and technically. So that's something I think about in a lot of my work. Cumulativity is a word that I recently discovered that I think describes another major theme in my work. Corals are colonial animals, and as such, their polyps grow together to form these reefs. In my work, I explore the idea of these cumulative forms floating into one another and kind of coalescing into a whole. The year 2014 is when I began focusing my designs on elevating corals off the reef with anti-gravity kind of swirling wall reliefs. So this work here is called Our Changing Seas 3. And I created that in 2014. And that was my first work that really explored this idea through cumulative objects. It debuted at the Tang Museum for an invitational exhibition at my alma mater, Skidmore College. And when I was designing it, I was thinking about the rapid transition that corals are making from healthy, colorful, and diverse to sickened and bleached, and kind of putting them into the proverbial eye of the storm in a sort of hurricane spiral motif. So in this design, healthy corals are surrounded by the sterile white skeletons of bleached corals swirling around like they're in a hurricane or a cyclone. Our Changing Seas 3 has toured around the country a bit, and I'm thrilled at how people of all ages respond to it, especially students. So this was at Virginia MoCA, where I had a solo show in 2016. And in 2022, David Stark Design invited me to reimagine this work for an exhibition at the Vacheron Constantin flagship boutique on Madison Avenue in New York. So that was kind of a fun way to tap into a completely different audience. And reimagine the work. Patterns in nature is another core theme in my work that I explore a lot. I already mentioned being inspired by hurricane spirals, but I also look to other swirling patterns commonly found in nature. This is a work I did called Gyre, which it was a private commission that debuted at the Brandywine Museum of Art in Pennsylvania in 2022. And it's a really optimistic, colorful work that was inspired by coral reef invertebrates, but also floral patterns and colors with lots of attention to tiny details. Ocean waves, seashells, fern fiddleheads, even galaxies serve as influences. This is a photo of Our Changing Seas 4, which I completed in 2019 as a private commission for a collector in Oregon. And I started working on it in 2016, actually, before I moved from Denver to Los Angeles in 2017. And I finished it while I was doing an artist residency at the Lux Art Institute, which is now part of the Institute for Contemporary Art in San Diego. And that was in 2019. I took design inspiration from photos of spiral and double spiral galaxies for this one. Our Changing Seas 4 was another really meaningful work for me because it was really one of my first major commissions, and there were no real restrictions on size or concept or deadlines. It was just like trust in me to create something awesome. So it was a lot of fun. And this is a photo that I took of it that was featured on the cover of American Craft in summer 2021. And before that, in 2020, the United Nations Postal Administration actually published it on official UN stamp for the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. Speaking of 2020, in March 2020, just as everything was shutting down, I flew to a remote shipyard in Norway and installed this two-part work in the reception area of the Lindblad Expedition's National Geographic Endurance Polar Expedition vessel, a ship that has a permanent ship-based exhibition called Change, which was curated by the artist Zaria Foreman, who also explores climate change in her work. So I was thinking about benthic invertebrate communities in the Arctic, which are actually really exquisite with anemones and tunicates and soft corals and sponges that grow among one another in these and kind of undulate in the icy currents. So this pair of ceramic sculptural works explores Svalbard, Norway's unique seafloor ecosystem. And it's in sort of an idealized vignette that aims to inspire wonder, curiosity, and conservation. This is a detail shot from another colorful swirling work that I completed in 2021 called Revolve. It's composed of 250 individual ceramic corals, anemones, and sponges that swirl in a colorful vortex with bleached white corals around the edges, sort of like the work that's in my background here too. It's installed in the seminar room of the Environmental Studies building at Wofford College, which is a liberal arts school in Spartanburg, South Carolina. And I created it in the memory of a student there whose parents commissioned it as a gift to the school. So that was a really meaningful project. And I hope when students stare at it during class, they will come up with all kinds of creative solutions to fight climate change and protect the ocean. This is Malum geminos. This is more of a fractal pattern, and it's fractal patterns are common in corals and in the veins of leaves and other flora and fauna. So that's another pattern I have explored a little bit in my work. I created it in 2019 for an exhibition called Fragile Earth at the Florence Griswold Museum in Connecticut. And that was curated by Dr. Jenny Parsons. Malum geminos means evil twins in Latin. And so I thought of that as an homage to Dr. Jane Lubchenco, who I mentioned earlier, and who in 2009 made a statement at the UN climate talks in Copenhagen referring to ocean acidification as the equally evil twin of climate change caused by carbon dioxide emissions dissolving into the sea. Bleached corals in this work branch horizontally in a book-matched pattern across the gallery wall. And clusters of gelatinous white polyps appear to have had their supportive skeletons dissolved by acidic seawater. That skeletal nature of the design also references Dr. Lubchenco's other profound comparison to ocean acidification as being like osteoporosis of the sea. So I thought that was an interesting concept to explore. Today, this work is included in a touring fashion retrospective of Iris van Herpen's work called Sculpting the Senses. And it was curated by Chloé Pitillot and Louise Curtis for the Musée des Arts Décoratifs in Paris, also known as Mad Paris, and it's right next door to the Louvre. So that exhibition debuted in November 2023, and it's currently on its way from Queensland, Australia's Gallery of Modern Art to the Art Science Museum in Singapore, where the exhibition is going to open on March 8th next year. Anti-gravity is another theme that's woven into a lot of my work. I briefly touched on the kind of aesthetic concept of anti-gravity in my work, but gravity is also something that I enjoy playing with and that I deal with a lot in terms of technical engineering that enables my work to attempt to defy gravity by hanging it really high up on the wall. I enjoy working with design build teams of engineers and architects and contractors, designers and art handlers to create permanent installations in public spaces and workplaces that often happen to be in earthquake zones. And Our Changing Seas 8, that was in the video that I showed previously, is one example of that. And so is this one. This one is called Confluence, Our Changing Seas 5, which is the second largest work that I've done to date. Kind of a related theme in my work is monumentality. And that's something I I challenge myself to do in a lot of my large scale work. As you can see, I like to work big, and I hope that the idea of one small person and a woman creating such huge, muscular, intricately detailed sculptural installations causes viewers to realize just how big the problem facing reefs is, but also how important reefs are to me. And hopefully, it'll spark a sense of curiosity in viewers to learn more about how the ocean is important to them as well. Confluence is absolutely enormous. It's 28 feet high from above that marble plinth, and it's about 18 feet wide. That's me sitting at the base to show scale. And we installed it in October 2018 as part of the permanent collection of the US Embassy in Jakarta, Indonesia. So it was commissioned by the US US State Department's Office of Art and Embassies, curated by Virginia Shore and Claire Dalba. At its heart, Confluence really celebrates my favorite aesthetic aspects of a healthy, diverse, colorful coral reef. By bleaching white, corals offer us a stark visualization of climate change, something that's often difficult for us to see and understand firsthand outside of seeing the scary floods and wildfires on the news. Corals offer a gentler and more emotional way to kind of see warming oceans that I find very powerful. As I mentioned, it's possible for corals to recover from bleaching if the stressor, the temperature, gets back to normal quickly enough. So I wanted the viewer to be able to interpret this work either optimistically or pessimistically, swirling inward or outward. So here's a detail shot of the finished work, and I really wanted viewers to be drawn in by the diversity of the detail and for them to feel the way I do when I'm hovering over a healthy coral reef in the wild. Because I think that is what makes us become personally invested in kind of exploring the reef and discovering how reefs are important to us individually. Or that's what I hope. My design and building process has evolved a ton in the past 14 or so years since those early days of creating as many corals as I possibly could and figuring out how they fit together later. So I'm much more meticulous and organized now, and I decide where every single piece of hardware will go up on the wall before I start making a single piece. I always start with a hand-drawn sketch. This one for Confluence is after I put it into Photoshop to overlay it onto an architectural rendering for the embassy contractor team. But from that sketch, I usually make an installation map with precise measurements so that everything fits together like a big three-dimensional puzzle. The horizontal lines on this map correspond to the white lines on the floor of my studio that you can see here. And then I cut out paper footprints, in this case, for each numbered piece of my sketch. In the video that I showed when I was building our Changing Seas 8 more recently, you could see a full-scale vinyl, like black and white vinyl template on the floor of my studio. And that's something that I had printed that we were able to actually use on the floor and then put up onto the wall on site and use for installation, which was super helpful. So these photos are from before I discovered that process and when I was doing it the hard way. The design for this work was so big that only half of it would fit on the floor of my studio at a time. So I had to build the work in two phases. This is the lower half in progress in my old studio in Los Angeles in 2018. And I started building kind of from the eye of the cyclone outwards, if you will. So I wanted to convey a sense of swirling, floating motion in this work. And so I built each piece in relation to its neighbors so the forms could continue in a direction from one to the next. In this case, the work is comprised of 404 individual pieces. After I coil build hollow forms from my gritty stoneware sculpture clay, I handcraft each branch, mound, and texture using simple tools and texture each piece by hand. So I often sit there poking thousands of holes to mimic the repetitive growth of coral colonies. I listen to a lot of podcasts. When I'm not printing my design templates, I usually hand draw my template by projecting the sketch full scale onto tracing paper on the wall and then lay that on the floor and build on top of it. After each piece has had time to dry completely, then I fire them in my electric kilns. And individual pieces are finished and fired using a color template or a palette of glazes that I've developed to reflect the vibrant tones and textures of healthy marine invertebrate communities. And they're often juxtaposed against white glazes to emphasize that stark contrast of coral bleaching. Once pieces are glazed and fired, I reassemble them at each step of the process to double check that they fit onto my big floor map. And then I mark the template where each piece of hardware is fitted on the back. So after final measurements, everything is ready to be packed and installed. Confluence took me about a year to complete with the help of one assistant and my husband and even my mom at times. I do most of the work myself, but nowadays I try to hire more help when I can, when I have a big project. It's physically very demanding, as you might imagine. And then I love hiring professional art handlers to pack my work. And I've worked with lots of different amazing art handling companies. This is when Atelier 4 was packing my work to ship to Indonesia for installation. You might imagine that it's really tricky to pack and ship my work, and you're right. But I learned so much from professional art handlers, and every time they come to my studio to pack my work, I learn something new. They really are artists in their own right. So it's amazing to learn how many techniques they have for bracing fragile pieces and cushioning objects from every direction without applying too much pressure. So this is a work I did called Oil Drum that's all ceramic and no packing peanuts allowed. This is when it was packed a couple months ago to ship to Germany from my studio, packed by Minnesota Street Project, which is a great group here in San Francisco. At the embassy in Jakarta, I had a great team of art handlers who helped install the work over the course of about 9 days. And we had tandem scissor lifts, so it was very technical. It was intense and complicated to install, especially because we didn't have a full-size template. So we had to measure out every single piece of hardware on the wall before installing. But the team was amazing and it was really fun. It was also kind of funny because people kept coming up to talk to us on the scissor lifts from the second story level on their way to the cafeteria. So it was a lot. Interconnectivity is another theme. Interconnectedness is something I explore in a lot of my work. And I mentioned at the beginning that we're all connected to the sea. So this work, Aqueduct, that is courtesy the photo from Hillwood from the current exhibition, is kind of a surrealist look at that idea. So it's a site-sensitive installation that takes shape in different forms depending on where it's installed. If you go see Fragile Beauty at Hillwood, this is what you'll find. And this version is the first rendition, which I installed at Virginia MoCA for my solo show there in 2016. It's a playful yet ominous exploration of sea level rise, basically. And I was thinking about species migrations caused by climate change, with hundreds of porcelain and stoneware corals, anemones, sponges, and other marine invertebrates kind of spilling into the gallery from a hand-carved porcelain air duct register that I made. So it's all ceramic. When I created it, I was thinking about what might happen in a surrealist sort of way when climate change causes tropical sea creatures to migrate towards the poles and invade terrestrial and human spaces, when seawater warms and sea levels rise. Will we act urgently to halt climate change and keep the ocean in its place, or will we allow the sea to consume us? My Hope Spot series also explores connections between us. It's inspired by Dr. Sylvia Earle's organization, Mission Blue. And since 2012, I've created dozens of these works to support the organization and its message. My goal with these pieces is to inspire people to have hope that there are still healthy, diverse ecosystems left on Earth that are possible to protect and so worth saving. This is my most recent one, created in 2023, and it represents the coral triangle. It debuted at the Minnesota Marine Art Museum during my solo show there last summer. Not all hope spots are in coral reef regions, just some of my favorites. So it's been a fun way to challenge myself to explore other ecosystems too. This one's the Charlie Gibbs Fracture Zone, which is a deep sea region between the Azores and Iceland. And this one represents the Micronesian islands, including around Palau. So that's another tropical reef area that has fascinated me. And this one was collected by the New Bedford Whaling Museum in 2022. Interconnectivity is also the major concept behind my third largest work that I've ever done, also back in Indonesia. In 2016, a nonprofit organization called the Coral Triangle Center, or CTC, contacted me to commission a large-scale ceramic sculptural wall relief for their new Center for Marine Conservation in Bali, which serves as an educational center for local and tourist visitors, as well as CTC office headquarters, and it provides meeting spaces for marine scientists and other groups. It's a really great group of people. Between 2016 and 2018, this project evolved into a community-based project that I designed and oversaw, basically. So we formed a team of over 300 Indonesian artists, artisans, and local volunteers, including some marine scientists, to learn how to create over 2,000 ceramic coral pieces for this installation. This was during a workshop called Anemone Day with the director and her family. And I'm so proud to have been part of this project and visited Bali 5 times during those 2 years to lead workshops and select glazes and work with the architect and contractors to figure out the mechanics of the installation. And after over a year of workshops and weekly Skype calls, this was in the land before Zoom, it took us about 12 full days to install the pieces with a team of myself and our local lead artist, Rico Gabriel, and a few other key project members. The installation process was really labor intensive, and we ended up installing approximately 2,000 individual ceramic coral pieces onto a masonry wall. And I'm not sure how many of you had tried to permanently attach fragile ceramic to stuccoed brick walls, but it takes forever. And we finished in September 2018, just in time for the Art Ocean Conference in Bali. This is a panorama image that they created of the entire piece. It's over 60 feet long, and the title is Semesta Terumbu Karang, which means coral universe. Here's a wide angle shot that I took of our lead local artist, Rico, who was instrumental in pulling off this huge project. And here's the central kind of bullseye of the design. The US ambassador to Indonesia at the time, Joseph Donovan, considered the work to be kind of a form of cultural diplomacy. So we used it to highlight how the US and Indonesia can work together to conserve coral reefs. And we did a press conference with CNN Indonesia and other outlets about the unveiling. And in October 2019, I was invited by the State Department to do a 9-day artist exchange hosted by the US Embassy in Jakarta and the consulate in Surabaya, Indonesia, to travel around doing workshops with high school and college students. We used air dry clay and water-based paints to create these great little pieces over the course of a few hours per workshop, and each student was able to take their piece home. So it was a really interesting, creative way to have kind of a cross-cultural and interdisciplinary conversation about reef conservation issues, art, climate change, and really pride of place with amazing coral reefs right off the coast in these kids' backyards. So some of them even took a snorkeling lesson to see the corals for themselves for the first time ever after the workshop. So that was really cool. When I was doing my master's thesis research about art for coral reef conservation back in 2010, I interviewed Carl Safina, who is an award-winning ecologist and author in New York. And he told me, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said, do what you can uniquely do to make a difference, to help protect and restore the ocean. And I thought that was a really empowering idea. So what I've shown you today is really an example of how I took that idea to heart, and I do what I can uniquely do to visualize climate change through the fragile beauty of marine life. I often feel like I'm creating monuments in honor of coral reefs. Some days I worry that I might be making memorials to them, but I hope not. I still feel like I'm just getting started, and I hope that this work will continue to grow and change and inspire greater levels of support for ocean conservation. And we'll see climate change slow and life in the ocean recover. Nature really can heal itself if we let it, and we know how. We can prioritize renewable energy, we can reduce global consumption of meat and other resources, educate women, and we can vote at the ballot and with our dollars to prioritize those things on a much greater scale. It's going to take all kinds of creative and innovative solutions all at once. And I ask, what will you choose to do? So thank you so much.
Wow, thank you so much, Courtney. I have to say, as an artist myself, I'm feeling very puny and underproductive right now. That was very impressive. And thank you for that fascinating view, for taking us into this beautiful world that not many of us get to see or experience in person. And it's really a perfect medium for you to explore your dual interests of art and science. And as you say, it really emphasizes that artists have an important voice. So yeah, we appreciate everything you've just presented.
Thank you.
While we get started, I think we have a few questions in the Q&A, and I did see one or two come up in the chat, and I saw somebody raise their hand. And just remember, we can't actually see you on the screen, so if you have a question, please do type it into the Q&A and we'll get to it. But I just wanted to start off with a simple question. The photos you showed of the actual underwater life is so gorgeous. And I'm wondering, when you making your pieces, are you sort of are they kind of realistic to those, or are you making things up just that are in the spirit of?
That's a good question. I do definitely use a lot of artistic license. I think in a lot of my work, because I have studied the taxonomy of coral reefs and I know how to identify different species when I'm diving, I do have some favorites and I incorporate them into my work, but I really try not to be too literal. I think it's more important to evoke the feelings I have when I'm diving and like what made me fall in love with reefs in the first place, instead of really specifically accurately kind of representing certain species. So I create hybrids sometimes of my favorite ones.
Great. Well, they're all beautiful.
Thank you.
I'm just scrolling through some of these questions. Your range of work is remarkable, and the spaces you have exhibited, international major museums and boutiques, are equally impressive. In your dreams, what space is calling to you as your dream place to exhibit future work, and why?
Hmm, that's a great question. I I'm having so much fun. I love showing my work in surprising, unexpected places. And I love not preaching to the choir in terms of only showing my work to like the scientific community. I think reaching people from like hospitality and research settings, as kind of lame as that sounds, I think is really exciting because it can kind of catch people off guard and get them into these ideas. Um, so, I mean, for me, my instinct is always to go bigger. So if I could create something like absolutely, 4 stories
Wow.
high and I don't know. I'd love to explore some outdoor work too, but my work is so fragile. So I have only done very limited forays into that. But I am starting to experiment with glass a little bit. Like, I think it would be
Uh-huh.
really interesting to incorporate glass tentacles and kind of small components. So that's the next kind of thing I'm experimenting with right now.
Great. let me see. We have a question here. Do you notice much diversity in general in species of coral across the world's reefs?
Yeah, so there's a big difference in diversity depending on the region you're in when you look at a reef. So that part of Indonesia that I was talking about, and the Coral Triangle in general, those six countries that incorporate that ecological region is so diverse with like thousands of different species, way more than you might find in the Caribbean, for example. And that species kind of redundancy in the ecosystem can make the ecosystem more resilient to damage. So that might be why we're seeing a lot more damage in the Caribbean in terms of bleaching and disease and other threats compared to somewhere that's really diverse, like in those parts of Indonesia.
Right. So I will say we don't have that much more time. I'm going to pick a few questions, but we do have some questions about your technique, and I just want to remind everybody that if you're able to come to the in-person presentation, although it's not a demonstration, there will be a bit more information about her technique. Um, but let me see if I can pick one or two of these. Oh, somebody actually is asking about your how do you rationalize your considerable air travel with your goals to bring attention to climate change?
That's true. That's a good point. And it's not even just air travel, it's firing kilns and all that kind of
Mm.
stuff too. I think about it a lot because I want to make sure that I am only taking trips when I absolutely need to install my work and ensure that it's installed properly and has a successful exhibition or final installation. I feel like there is a lot of guilt that corporations and policymakers put on us as individuals to feel like our individual impacts somehow compare to the massive, huge impacts that corporations are having that far exceed anything that we individually can do. So while I do make a really strong effort to walk the walk and be really mindful of all my resource use and waste, I also like to highlight how corporations and policymakers are responsible for a huge amount of that, and we need to hold them accountable as well.
Yeah, thank you. So we are at 2 o'clock, so unfortunately we don't have time for more questions. I will say that again, yeah, on Saturday we have our Hillwood program. So if you are interested in that, please go to our JRACraft .org website, and you'll see information on how to register for that. Again, it won't be a demo, but there will be a few more videos about the technique. And also, we are making an attempt, hopefully, to get Courtney here, possibly in a few months, for a workshop, a more technique oriented event. So we will let everybody know about that. Um, what else have I not said? Hillwood, somebody asked, where is Hillwood? Hillwood actually is in Washington, D.C. So if you're in the D.C. area, and you want to come on Saturday, that would be an easy thing to do. Um, so for now, I just want to thank Courtney very, very much for this fascinating presentation. Really, really inspiring to see you doing this kind of work and to bringing attention to these very important issues.
Thank
Um,
you so much. It's my
yeah, thank
pleasure.
you. Perry, did you have any other information you wanted to share? I know that we have Courtney's during the presentation we haven't been putting some links to Courtney's Instagram and that kind of thing. If anybody missed that, you might be able to get in touch with us and we can send that, or it's probably widely available online to
Mhm.
find out.
Yeah,
Have
you can
every
register to join us on Saturday at the link in the chat. And if you have any questions, you can always reach me over email at Perry, Peri, at JRA.org, and I'll put that in the chat as well.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And thank you so much again, Courtney. And please do have a look at our website for two more upcoming Distinguished Artist Series programs with a woodworker and a paper artist. So those should be interesting too. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank
Bye.
you. Take care.